Good morning, good afternoon, and probably good evening to all of you, because I know that you are joining us from many parts of the world. Welcome to this presentation of the Modern China Biographical Database, which I will call MCBD in the rest of my presentation to make it shorter. Why did we decide to develop this biographical database? Well, first, this is part of the ERC project that I'm conducting on the transformation of elites in modern China. And so this database is a product of a collective work by the ENP-China research team. The second reason is more important. The modern period is a sort of forgotten period. We have databases for the imperial period, especially CBDB at Harvard University. And we also have databases for the PRC. But for the modern period, and especially the Republican era, well, there's nothing that's really amount to any kind of database. The third reason is very fundamental to us. It's to serve the international community of China scholars with a genuinely international, multilingual, and freely accessible database. But our purpose is not just to develop a biographical database. Our ambition is one that we want to establish an instrument that is really tailored to the academic ecosystem that has been developing in the last 2 decades, and more specifically in the last decade, by which I mean the great digital transformation. My presentation will include 2 parts. I will use a few slides to present the background, how we conceive the database, and I will give also examples of the issues and challenges of processing the historical data and turning it into data. And my second part will be devoted to a presentation of the actual database. So I will take you into the system. So first, I will share my screen with this PowerPoint presentation. And what I want to introduce first is the public interface of MCBD. As I say, we focus on modern China. Modern China means the period between 1830 and 1949. It's a short but eventful period. It's also a time of drastic transformation. 1830, it's imperial China before the great challenges, by which I mean internal disorders, external threats, and then wars and rebellions that actually shook the empire and led to its collapse. And 1949 is the end of the Republican regime of the mainland and the establishment of the PRC. So within this period, we examine actors, events. And for this, as historians, we need to rely on accurate and rich information. In the past, for my generation, we used to rely on instruments such as dictionaries, biographical dictionaries, or series like Mingguo Zhuanji, things like that, in print format. But nowadays, we can use other kinds of resources. And this is the move from print to digital. This great migration has started some time ago, first with our usual resources, academic papers, academic books. But now we also have primary materials like newspapers, periodicals. We also have a wide range of source materials being digitized. Initially, these were all images but in the recent decade, a lot of this has become full text. And we need to adapt our approach, our instruments, our methods to these vast corpora. Whatever the topics, whatever the approach, we cannot avoid to take into account this transformation. We'll be using these resources to a certain degree. Not all of us will be doing prosopographic studies or studies focused based on biographies, but still the availability of these vast corpora of materials raises a challenge to historians. With MCBD, what we ambition to do is actually to have a platform where you can find people, you can find actors, so that when you use these Chinese language, Western language, historical sources, you will be able to identify these people. Because as you will see in my presentation, it's nothing obvious to actually identify historical actors in historical sources beyond the main figures. And even for them, sometimes there are issues. So what I mean to say that this transformation is for us historians a watershed. And historical research has become an entirely different ball game with these digital resources. Now, we're not the first to establish databases. There are precedents. The first one for the modern period was actually the China Biographical Database established by Marilyn Levine in the early 2000s. It has become obsolete. It's no longer online, but the data is there. And Marilyn Levine has kindly accepted to contribute and collaborate to our project. Now, there are major databases like CBDB, China Biographical Database at Harvard, that covers almost the entire imperial period. We have newcomers like the Singapore Biographical Database, which proposes a graph approach to biographies. We have also this database of Chinese engineers that the University of Leipzig is developing with Professor Kasker. The University of Boston is, for its part, developing the China Historical Christian Database. It's also a very brand new resource. And we should include into this array of databases produced outside of China, mostly, the Lee Campbell Group and the various data sets that have been producing over the years, and that also present a dimension of biographical data. So what you see here is the main page for the public interface of the database. If you go there, then you will have this very simple, very neat, but very basic search interface. You can type any name in Pinyin or in English or in Chinese, and you will get the result for the person that you are looking for. This was the public interface that we opened some time ago, but we were aware that for scholars, you need to have more advanced features to do queries. Unfortunately, so far, the system we use does not provide the possibility to have a more elaborate public interface. And so we decided to open up the database, and now you can sign up to become a member. There are no restrictions, no conditions. If you click on this sign up for a member account for full access, you will arrive on this page on our website, and there you can type in your name, email address, affiliation, position, and send us a message if you want to, and then we'll create an account for you. I will explain that in the rest of my presentation. Let me first explain how we design the database. This is very important because when one wants to establish such an instrument, it's very important to really know the field. we proceeded in two steps. The first one was to establish a prototype. So basically, we used a spreadsheet and we defined what we wanted to include, what elements, what data, and of course, the connections we wanted to establish between these various elements. So we thought for a long time about this prototyping, and then we moved to design. And before we moved to design, in fact, we were aware that there were technological choices to be made. And there we followed two basic principles. The first one was very simply, do not reinvent the wheel. We were aware of the project that existed, that there were very good people, very good scholars out there, not necessarily on China, but people with expertise and experience with databases, especially biographical databases. And so we gathered a panel of experts for 2 days, and for 2 days we discussed the pros and cons and issues and challenges and methods of establishing a biographical database. At the end of this process, we had deeper conversations with these experts, and in the end, we decided to go for ERAsia to develop our own database. For what reason? Well, first, from the beginning, this is something that was designed by humanists for humanists. It's not a kind of a commercial kind of database and then you adapt it for academic purposes. It was thought for academic research. The second reason is that ERAsia is a ready-made toolbox. You can find everything you need, you want, and you can actually very easily build a database. Of course, it requires a little learning, no doubt about that, but it's far shorter than doing our own programming and coding. And this is something I would strongly advise against, which is to reinvent again the wheel. And the third reason we chose ERAsia is that it's a very responsive team of developers and an exceptional team leader with Ian Johnson, who is also extremely reactive. So what does it contain, in fact? What does a database contain? Well, MCBD is a database centered on individual actors. The actor, the person, is the core element of the database on whom all the relevant information is gathered and compiled. So in terms of scope, we take all the individuals, any individuals who was active in China between 1830 and 1949, any actor. The data covers the whole lifespan of these individuals, which means that in fact, in terms of actual data, we go beyond this 1949 divide. We do not stop because this is, the establishment of the PRC. If we have someone who is still living, then we gather all the data up to today. Now, our initial targets in the ENP-China project are the elites. But in fact, MCBD is all-inclusive. Realistically, we all know that sources, of course, largely dictate what we can find on people. And of course, the elites are naturally, I would say, much more represented in sources. Yet, apart from our research concerns, as I said, we do not filter out anyone. And so, based on the sources that we have, we integrate any individual that we find. Second, and this is also important to state, we include both Chinese and non-Chinese. There's a tendency in many databases on China, especially in China, to focus solely on the Chinese. And some other databases outside of China focus almost exclusively on foreigners. And this is not our position. we take all the Chinese in the broad sense, namely all individuals who were born and raised in China or in the geopolitical entity recognized as China. That means Han people, non-Han people, but also, in fact, overseas Chinese. And for non-Chinese, in fact, it's basically individuals from other countries. In plain terms, you would call them foreigners who worked in China, lived in China for a time, or settled in China. And for them too, we have cases of families that stayed in China for 2, 3, 4 generations. So this is what we are including, and based on this, so far, this is what we have. So we have a high number of individuals, more than 76,000. I'm not a big fan of figures. I mean, people like to, throw in lots of figures to say how big the database is, etc. We're at an early stage of development, and having that many is already a success in a way, an achievement. What actually matters more to me is the actual content that we can associate to these individuals. As you can see, we have close to 56,000 positions. So you can do the math and see that there's a difference between the number of individuals and the number of positions, which means that we do have individuals without any data so far. And this is normal because a lot of these individuals came from the collection of directories, who is whose, etc., digitized and turned into full text by the Institute of Modern History at Academia Sinica. And I must salute my colleagues of this institute, especially Wu Zhenshu, Su Huimin, and Lian Liling, who were very proactive in providing us the whole collection that they had prepared for their own institute. And we actually extracted all the metadata. And so all the individuals who were in these books, hence the number of individuals. Now, beyond this, we've been collecting data on the companies and institutions, both in these books, but also in our own research. We have company statistics. So this is a special table I will explain, but basically we have more data for companies than we have, let's say, for institutions. Education, it means mostly degrees that these people received from middle schools, basically, but above all, from universities. And the last item you see here is observation. I will explain this special feature of MCBD because I do believe this is something that few databases do. So how do we envision this database? Well, the idea, as I said, is to match the conditions of research on modern China nowadays, which means that for anyone working on modern China, we have to use sources in multiple languages and in multiple forms of language as well. So we have newspapers, we have directories, we have diaries, we have sometimes archives when they were printed and we can turn them into full text. So this is an element that's important in itself. But the issue is that compared to those studying Imperial China, then non-Chinese sources are very important for the modern period because we have tons of documents that are produced in English, of course, in French, in Russian, in Spanish, in Italian, etc. And unfortunately, people at the time did not have a standardized system of transliteration of names. And so when they mention Chinese names of persons, institutions, or locations, they all have their own system. So it becomes a terrible mess, and I will show you that concretely in a second. We have these multiple Chinese names to start with. And even though most of the time, one person would have just one or two names, some people, as you can see in this example here, for instance, even in Chinese, appear with a multiplicity of names either because they use a zi, they use a hao, or they have a pen name, or they have a religious name, etc. Many reasons. But even for someone like Cai Yuanpei, you can see that you would find him in different publications with different names. If you do not know that, if you cannot connect these names to Cai Yuanpei, then of course you will think that there is another guy whose name is Cai Zimin, but he's not another guy. Okay, so MCBD serves to disambiguate these issues, including for Chinese historical actors. For Chinese actors as well, as I said, they were known under different names in different sources. Here, we relied exclusively on English language sources. So we do not even talk about sources in German or in Italian or in Russian, just in English. And just in English, you can see here, someone like Zhang Xiaoruo has 4 different names in various publications, mostly in these directories, but also in newspaper. Of course, some may be recognizable because the different transliteration are quite close to the origin. But if you take Liu Dajun and you have Do Qin K Liu, it becomes a little difficult. Okay, if you have Song Faxiang and then you have Fa Chen Ti Song, it's almost impossible to make the link to the original name. But look closely at the last 2 examples of Lu Meiseng and Jing Gupu. Well, and this is a case of other Chinese adopted names that were almost like a Western name. So Louis Mason or Raymond S. King are perfectly Western names. And so it's a challenge that we're meeting, also kind of a service that we want to provide, that is linking all the names to their, let's say, original canonical name. Last example, we have the same issue with Westerners. Westerners, those who were active, especially businessmen, diplomats, sometimes military, well, they were known under the original name, but in Chinese sources, in many cases, they were listed in Chinese, in a Chinese transliteration. And as you can see, for the same reason, there was no standard transliteration. If you take the last name, the last row, this Mr. Shishmarev Yakov, who was Russian, in fact, he had 13 different Chinese transliterations. So this gives you an idea of the extent of the complexity of using, exploiting, and doing data mining in historical sources for the modern China period. So the second element I want to emphasize in this presentation about how we envision MCBD is how we imagine or want to reimagine a biographical database. Of course, it has a standard data tables, so that I will present in a minute. So you are not all familiar with data tables. But where we depart and want to make a difference, there are 2 aspects. The first one is, as much as we can, we want to be able to maintain the link between the data in the data table and the original historical source, so that you would be able to go from the data to the original source, sometimes with an extract or sometimes the whole paper, the whole article. The second aspect that's in which I believe we are providing something that's new is that we have a special field called observations. What do we mean by that? In fact, initially wanted to call it actions. That's when you have a text that says something about an actor, an action, but either we cannot turn it into data because we need the substance of the text. Or another reason that we extract a lot of information automatically, but we do not always have the time to process everything. And rather than forgetting this, we actually provide this as a short paragraph, and all these extractions from, especially from the press, then become compiled with the name of the person, so that you have the information. Of course, it requires a little more than just reading one piece of data, but still it's here. And we have two levels. We have observations raw, which is basically the raw observation, and observation neat, a process refined observation. And eventually, sometimes, we also turn these observations into data. So the way we proceed, in fact, with to generate data is that there are two main ways. Like any database, we can enter data manually. Of course, you can create a record, type it in, etc. Very easy to do, but this is not the way we work most of the time. As I said, we work with digital corpora. So we implement digital technologies and techniques, algorithm. It's called natural language processing. We include into that machine learning. We include into that artificial intelligence. And so we extract a lot of information. And this information is turned into basically spreadsheets. The spreadsheets require, of course, a lot of cleaning, but basically with spreadsheets, and with this spreadsheet, we're able to import the whole set of data into the database. The data comes from our own research, okay? But it can also come from external groups or external researchers who are willing to contribute to the database. And for this, we can provide also guidelines, very simple guidelines to prepare the spreadsheets for import. We have four main circles of documents that serve to feed the database. Of course, we have what I call source materials, and we focus more specifically on directories, name lists, who is whose. So books that really provide biographical information. And in that, we also include biographical dictionaries, in Chinese or in English, that were produced in print, that we either obtain as in a digital form, or that we transform ourselves, in fact, and then we process them in the same way. To give you a range of idea, we have about 60 such works so far that cover mostly the Republican period. There were no such books before the Republican period. The second circle is huge. It's the press. Newspapers, periodicals, by which I mean general publications, students' journals, etc. And both in Chinese and in English. And for instance, we have in Chinese the Shenpao, and we are the only ones, I believe, so far, to have the full database of the Shenpao full text. Okay, this is not the online version. We really have everything, and we can process it in the same way. We can do the same for the other major collection that we use, which is the ProQuest collection of China historical newspapers, North China Herald, South China Morning Post, and many others. My third circle is the academic papers, academic books that are also in digital format, and we can also find a lot of biographical information therein, and we use them. And the last circle, the fourth one, is Wikipedia. Wikipedia has hundreds of thousands of biographies, and in fact, we actually downloaded all the biographies in Chinese and all the biographies in English, and then within that, we sorted out those that were biographies of people related to China. And this was a big challenge because actually Wikipedia does not provide a standard biographical document. So we use a very elaborate system of classification to do that. And more broadly on the internet, there's now a wealth of information, more or less reliable, of course, but the wealth of information was about people who are not major figures who appear here and there. And this is a fantastic resource. Let me show you that issue of names. I just take these two examples that you will see in the next slide, because when we process these books, the same people would appear with different names. In some cases, both names are quite well known. So we need to be, of course, very cautious, but basically, if we pay attention, we know that Kong Yongzhi is in fact Kong Qiangxi, not a problem. But you know, some figures like the one on the right, Yu Xiaqing, who was a major businessman in Shanghai, 90% of the time he was known as Yu Xiaqing. But sometimes, for whatever reason, they use his zi, and so it's Yu Hede. And again, there's nothing that we can do to actually anticipate this. Every time we have a name, we have to make sure that this is really a new person and not a duplicate name for the same person. You have here a good example of the kind of sources that we use. As you can see, this comes from this collection I mentioned before of the Institute of Modern History at Academia Sinica. On the left-hand side, you have the print page. This is the original book, okay? And on the right-hand side, you have the full text as it was typed very carefully. It's not just scanned in OCR, it was typed carefully. The same information, and this is this information that we actually mined. If you read these texts, we see that you have some information that's almost standardized, quite well structured in the first line, but then it's text. And the text needs to be split up, we say segmented, so that we can extract the information. And of course, here the biographies are quite the same. Every time we process a new book, we would have a different structure of text. When we apply our algorithms on the book that you just saw, this is what you got. This is a raw extraction. Already it's very good. So we were able to separate automatically the name and the birth location, the different places and degree and whatever of education, and then all the jobs and positions. But as you can see, the information here is still not clean. We have many elements that we don't want to keep, like Xiansheng, Mr., or there's information that we really want to split. We want to separate the province and the Xian, for instance. And of course, for education, we really want to separate the school or university, the degree, and in some cases, we also have the discipline, okay? And for the jobs, it's the same. We want to have the institution, the position separate, and you can see that there are many characters that are not useful at all that we have to get rid of, like Xianzhen, Lizhen, Tianzhen, etc. So it requires a lot of cleaning that can be done. A lot of it can be done automatically, fortunately, thanks to the kind of programming that we do. And once you do that, you obtain here a table that's almost neat. It's not the final table, it's close to the final table, but at the very least, you can see here the whole process of refining data that can go into the database. This is only when we have this that we can feed MCBD. Here you have the name, and then for each person, there are many lines as necessary when they had a different position in a different institution or a different degree in a different school. And you can see that the school is well identified. The year when we have it is identified. Unfortunately, a lot of these books do not provide timestamps or temporal data. So they just say Mr. So-and-so received his degree, got his job, etc. No date. Yeah, the school, as you can see, degree here, again, this is the same. And then here you can see that we separated the company and the position and the first position in other institutions. It is not yet in the final stage, but at the very least, you have a good idea of what we meet in terms of difficulties. In fact, the main difficulties are the contradictory information we have in the different sources about these individuals, the same individuals. Mostly it's about birthplace and birth date. That's so many contradictory information. Then the issue, as I said, of parallel names, because then we run the risk of creating two different people where there is one. And so for this, we have a method, which is basically we have a name index, and the name index includes the name, birth date, date of death, and birthplace. And with that, every time we process a new volume, we match the names and the data externally with this name index to make sure that we recognize everyone, and that everyone that is not recognized is really a new entry, I would say, a new actor. Another difficulty is that we have a lot of factual information, but not much, as I said, temporal information. We're really missing a lot in that sense. In using the press, the most challenging issue is the issue of OCR. As you say, as you know, most of these historical newspapers were scanned and then turned into full text automatically with software. And there are lots of issues. First, with letters that are not recognized properly. That's one thing. And so you may miss information, but more important, it's not what's segmented. And if you are a little familiar with natural language processing, it's imperative that we have segmentation, that is sentences. If we have a sentence that runs over a whole page, then it's very difficult to actually extract meaningful information. And there is a lot of that in the English language collection. In the case of the Chinese, it's an issue of work that was not done properly. And we have actually articles that are a compilation of several articles. So we have all these difficulties. And I would say that this is the reward and the curse of doing digital data mining. We extract enormous volumes of data, and all these data requires a cleaning. And when it's about the name, it's quite easy. If it's birth date, birthplace, again, it's just one or two elements of information. But when it comes to education, already it's a little more complex. And of course, for jobs, an individual can have many positions in his life with different institutions. And so to make this clean requires a lot of intervention, which the computer cannot do at some point. It's the human eye and the human brain and human hand that can actually create this. But on the reward side, because we use newspapers, we're able to gather a very rich qualitative data, also data that's accurate in terms of time. This is very different from building a database based on registers, like list of accountants in the archives, a list of students, and this is very important to do, no doubt. It's one way, but it's very dry data. Whereas the data that comes from the journals, the periodicals, it's really actors in action. It's really everyday life. It's really what they were doing at the time. And I believe that this is where we can really make a difference. Now, this is basically the end of my presentation about the database. Before we move to the actual database, I just want to show you the basic structure of MCBD, because as I said from the beginning, it is centered on the person, on the actor. You can see here the table, the main table for persons, and you can see the density of links, in fact, in terms of the width of the links or the edges here. So education, observations, institutions, positions. As you can see, positions is always related to both a person and institution. Companies, we separated institution and companies for very simple reasons. Companies are very well identified as it's commercial establishments. And often on them, we have different information, especially company statistics that we do not have for institutions. But in the database, when you assign a position, you can choose easily between the two tables. Then we have religion, marriage, event, and of course, place, because many of these elements of information are have a location. You were born somewhere, you died somewhere, you worked somewhere, you got married somewhere, etc. So we have a whole geospatial database that actually runs behind this system. So let me now move to the actual database. I will stop sharing this slide and share my screen with the Modern China Biographical Database. So now what you see is under the hood, if I can say so. I showed you before the public interface. This is the one that we use, that anybody with an account can use. And here you can have access not just to all the data, but above all, you have the possibility to do advanced queries. And of course, you can also export the result of your queries. So it looks like a database, which means that it's not very sexy. No database is usually very sexy. It's always some sort of tables and different menus. For those who have an account as members, you can only have access to the data. You cannot, of course, change the structure of a database, but you can add records. I mean, this is well within your privileges. If you do that, get in touch with us. Of course, we have the possibility to filter, so it's not an issue. But above all, if you have data that you want to share in spreadsheet format, then we strongly advise that you get in touch with us, because we're well trained in terms of import and also in terms of preparing the files to match the need of the database. You will see here, for instance, that I've decided to start from the entities person. You can choose from which entities you want to start. So you can choose person, institution, event, etc. If you type the name of a person in an event, probably you won't find it, because it will look for event as the main feed. So it's very simple. But in fact, the trick is if you just delete this, in fact, it will search in all the feeds, all the tables at the same time. Okay. I will stay in persons because I want to show you an example of this. And what I want to do is actually start with a very simple query with coping one. So as you can see, as soon as you get a match, you have something here. Of course, here I can edit, and I won't do that now. But this will give me the opportunity to actually show you how we design this database. So with this example, I will take you through the person table. I will not take you through all the table. It would take too much time. I will just point some time to just another table, but these are structured. The person, and first the issue of identification. we must identify each person and provide the elements that ensure this proper identification. So you have here the full name, the canonical name of the person. Then you have it broken into surname, first name, given name in both Pinyin and Chinese, and then all the alternative names the person had, either in Chinese or in these different English transliteration. And then, of course, the usual zi and hao. There can be sometimes several of them for the same person and gender. And here, a part of additional information, this is more specific to the Chinese, Jiquan, which is a concept you are all familiar with, ethnicity, which is Han or Manchu or whatever, language skill. There's something that's few databases record, but we believe it's very important, in fact, because these Chinese, especially Chinese elites, member Chinese elite, spoke various languages. Either they spoke foreign languages, they spoke English, Chinese, German, whatever, but they also spoke different Chinese dialects. And this is a very important dimension of individuals. So we record this also. We can add as many languages as we want, or the rest is not so important. Then the classic birth, death data. We want to know when they were born, where they were born. It's part of the identity of a person. From the country to the province to the actual location. And we provide the place of birth in a textual feed so that you have the information, or we get the information for the soul. We don't know exactly where it is. Sometimes we are able to identify it, sometimes not. And so at least we have a record of that. And when we're sure of the location, then we point to the actual location in our geospatial database, and you will see the results in a moment on the visualization of maps. Then we decided to divide the life of individuals in three elements: education events and position and life events. So here you can see, in the case of Ko Ping-wen, the various schools he attended, when he received his degrees, where he received it, etc. Then we have his career, in a way, his different positions over time. And life events here, there is no life event. It can be anything that is not really here. If we want to add one, as you can see, we can invent one. And here we will select the type of event that we have. We can give it a short description, the date, etc. So these are, it can be a meeting, it can be a club meeting, it can be a meal, it can be a tiffin, it can be anything that, well, we find or you find relevant to record. And here you can also, of course, indicate all the people who were possibly involved in this event. So so here we have a standard table. Again, with education, it would be very easy. If I really want to add one, so I can search for the school first, but here I can again choose a new institution, the date, etc. So these are the related tables. Again, as I said, I'm not going to give you a rundown of everything, but just the major elements. Personal life is very simple. It's mostly three elements: religious affiliation, of course, marriage, when we know when and where the person got married, okay? Otherwise, if we do not have this information, we have this third element here, which is to add a relationship. And the relationship is mostly about family relationships, to be the wife, the husband of, the son, the daughter, the grandson, the nephew, the son-in-law, etc. And if you choose one relation between two individuals, let's say Mr. Wang was married to Mrs. Li, then when you check out Mrs. Lee's record, automatically she will also appear as the wife of Mr. Wang. So all the elements that get connected in different directions. If you add someone as a grandson of someone, then that person will appear the grandfather, etc. But we're also introducing other elements of relationship, like friendship, again, when this is attested by the historical sources, or liaison, for instance. So we know that someone, they had an affair, and usually it's an important element of information that got lost because it's either gossip or you cannot really enter it into a proper relationship. So we have a wide range of possibilities here. Events, it's as I showed before, you can create any kind of event and relate persons to that. Finally, to make it short, the metadata part, very important, with two elements, two basic elements. The first one is sources. Okay, so we list all the sources down to the page level that we used in this for this biographical data. And if we have data that come from an external research group or external scholar who could, then we indicate clearly the provenance. So name of the person, name of the research group, of course, to give full credit. And then we also provide the URL. Usually there is one, especially for research group. We provide the URL of the original website. So we make sure that we are not predators or thieves. We really want to integrate data as long as it is public, of course, and produced under license that allow the use of this data, but we credit fully these elements to their original owners. So I will of course not do any change and come back to my initial query to show you that when you have a person, then here on the right, you have the same thing as before, but listed. So and all the links that may exist between him and other, as you can see, all the different sources in which we found information. Now, you can also visualize this, as I said, so this view is never interesting, but I can show you, it's just the same. There's one person, so it's never interesting, but you can get a copy, an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, and then timeline and map. So the map is just that it shows you that he was born in Shanghai. Okay, that's why you see used to it by default on an OpenStreetMap, so no historical map. You can move this up, and it should show you in a second, in fact, the timeline of Guo Pingwen, his entire life, education, and positions. Okay, so that's well, it may take some time, so I will maybe skip this part because you will see more in a minute. You can search persons, as I said, but you can also search institutions. If I choose to check Columbia University, for example, then of course I find Columbia itself. It's not very interesting. What is much more interesting is that I find all the Chinese, all the people who studied at Columbia and received a degree from Columbia University. And as you can see here, this is a timeline that's produced automatically. I do not know if I can, well, you will see better if I change the this is everyone who ever studied at Columbia. Of course, I chose Columbia on purpose because there were many people over that period that actually studied at. Now, I can do these very simple queries, but as I said, I can also do advanced queries. I can look for people who, for instance, were Chinese and studied in European universities. So to save time, because when you do a query, you can save your query. It's called saved filters. Filters is in fact a way of filtering the data and a way to do the search. I have several of them here. So I will show you here. It's a predetermined list, but I looked up all the Chinese who studied science, hard science, natural science in European universities. So these were my criteria here. Everything, any diploma, but everything that was science in European university. You can be more specific, and I can use another filter, which I prepared here, which is basically to show you all the persons who studied at Columbia, received a PhD, and were originated from Jiangsu. So this is I will just provide the record view, the list view. Yes, okay. So here you have the list view of these people, and yes, it should show them on the timeline and the map. So on the map you would see where they were born mostly, and here you would see the timeline. They were not exactly in the same period, all of them. So you see, you can do very refined queries. You can, I mean, it's very simple to do. One needs to learn. Of course, new users, what we'll be doing in the next future is to organize some hands-on workshop to explain how it works, but we can also provide a quick start guide. If you really want to explore, in fact, I will show you at the end of this presentation a number of links so that you can see the user manual that we produce for MCBD. Now, let me finish this presentation with something more specific. And I want to use the example of another historical figure, Xu Mo. Because I want to show you precisely the feature I mentioned before. And the feature I mentioned before is that here you have the basic data, like coping when and when ago, so education, positions, but you also have observations. And these observations, in the case of Xu Mo, were all the articles that we found in the English language press. And in this case, we just took the title of the article, which in itself provides information. You know, you have a date, you have a source, you know, it's a newspaper article, and it tells you, for instance, that Judge Xu Mo was appointed Commissioner of Foreign Affairs on May 11th, 1929. So, of course, this is information that can be turned into data, no doubt. Now, what you can also do from here, in fact, thanks to our system, is that you can go to the original source directly. So you have not just the title of the articles, but you also get the full text of the article. And you can read the article, provided you have access to this collection through your university of ProQuest historical newspaper. But you can see the great advantage of doing this, that you have this, you have the information about the person, and you have the historical source directly, readily available for you. And of course, it also means that conversely, we could go from the ProQuest database with this system of identifiers to our database, so that you could possibly, you can imagine that once we link the data, it can work both ways. And so when you have someone like Xu Mo who appears, you do not know exactly who that person is, especially with this strange transliteration, then you can come to the database directly. It's not yet operational. This is basically what we want to do, which is basically to provide identifiers so that we can make the link both ways. Now, we did the same with another, with several examples like this, of course. Let me show you the difference when it comes to Chinese Chinese sources. Sorry, I have to do. Yeah, I want the person. So same thing, basic data, okay? And here also observations, okay? You can see that the nature of observation is slightly different here. These are extracts from the text, from the newspaper articles where we found Mr. Yu Mingyu. And this is exactly the example that I mentioned, that sometimes we do not want, or don't have the time to process immediately all the information. But in any case, this information itself is important. We know that on June 1st, 1947, Mr. Yu Mingyu was together with other people. They are listed. He was together as a member of the 工业贷款审查委员, for instance. So this information that we can combine like this. The difference is, in the case of Shenpao, we cannot make the link to the online newspaper, because even though we have access to the full text and we have all the identifiers of each article and we can make the link within our own database, unfortunately, the provider does not provide URLs with these identifiers. So for each article, it's a standardized kind of blank URL, and there's no way we can connect this. This is very unfortunate. We're trying to convince the provider to change its policy, but it's beyond our means. But at the very least, we provide the contextual information about the person. And you can see here that this all comes with the Shenpao, with the date, with the title, the article, and etc. So it's a very rich information. My last example, I will go back to my filters. It's in fact, we processed the whole Broman Biographical Dictionary of Republican China. So it's about 589 people on whom we have a lot of information. And again, it's very easy to search all of them at the same time. And here you will see that they will be listed as before on the timeline and on the map. It will take some time because there are lots of them. Yes, okay. So because they were born all over the place, mostly in China, but also, you know, as I said, we include people who were born outside, I mean, overseas Chinese. Then if I zoom in, I can see that there were two people who were born in California or in the United States West Coast. So you have a good example. And then you have China, of course. And as you zoom in, you can see more and more people. And of course, again, you can see exactly who it was. So it gives you immediately a sense of where these people came from. Because we are limited by the possibilities that this interface provides, we have to choose what to represent, in this case, the birthplace. But in fact, you can, as I said, export the data. So for all the group that here, you can choose to export as a CSV, okay? You can also export it as a KML, so you can get the map that you just saw as a KML and you can use it on Google Maps, on Google Earth. You can also actually see, export them as a network when there are connections between them with Gephi. And so which means that the data can always be used in a third-party software. This is very important for spatial analysis. You want to do more elaborate analysis on spatial distribution or social, socioeconomic status, profession, etc. Once you get the CSV, Well, you can process it in any kind of a, as I said, third-party software. So this is basically what I wanted to show in terms of the content and the way the database works. This is a database which is open to everyone, and we really welcome people to use it, to give us feedback, but also to contribute. The main purpose here is really to create a commons for modern Chinese history, something which is a shared good, a shared instrument. Once you're an authenticated user, you can upload data, you can create, and as I said, you can get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to help you if you want to share your data. Now, if you want to find us, in fact, let me show you a few pages where you can see what we do. So this is the website of the ENP-China Project. And if you want to go to the database, it's all under biodata, okay? And if you go there, then you will land on the page where you can register to sign up. If you want to see how the database was designed, we have here under databases the MCBD manual. So it's the presentation, as you can see, of the aims and scope and sources structure, and then a detailed presentation of the various tables of the database. This is a good introduction if you want to know your way in the database, even to do queries. It will help you do your queries knowing how we design the database. Okay. We also have a blog. You can see here, Elite Network and Power in Modern China, where we keep you informed of the various developments of the project, but also of its instruments, in particular, of course, the Modern China Biographical Database. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I look forward to hear from you and to collaborate, possibly. And at any rate, do not hesitate to get in touch with us. We're easy to find. You can just Google the name of the project, Google my name, and we'll be responsive, and hopefully we'll be able to work together. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you next time at the next webinar for an introduction on how to use it, hopefully. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.